All right, so I do want to give Hilary her proper introduction that she deserves. So, you know, Hilary has spent over half of her life designing primary research solutions to meet customer needs of clients. She lives and breathes research. It's no wonder then why she's charged with overseeing all research methods, strategy, and tactics for material. She especially loves to collaborate with clients and staff to solve challenging business problems. She's joined LRW Material in 2001 as a Senior Vice President of Research Methods. She previously served in research roles at Merit Research, Los Angeles Times, where she earned a partnership award, and the Mark Group. She holds a master's degree from the University of Georgia and a BS in quantitative psychology from UCLA. She's also, you know, an informal mentor of mine. I've known Hilary for 2 decades, and I just feel, you know, extremely blessed and privileged to really be anywhere near or around her at any time. So I'm thrilled that she's here, and thank you so much, Hilary.
Thank you, China. Segmentation is my passion, so I'm really excited to share it with all of you today. As you can tell from the introduction, it's based on decades of experience and hundreds of segmentation studies in dozens of different product categories. As well as not only the experience and the relevance of that, but just some more timely information about what's been going on as a result of the pandemic, as well as the changes in marketing technology that have happened out there. For those of you who are part of the Cal Poly Analytics group, you know, you may not have job experience yet in this field, but what I'd like you to do is imagine you've graduated, you're working on one of your favorite brands in a consumer insights role. And if you're joining us from the Insights Association, you may already have a brand to think about, but just try to use that, you know, real world context as I go through things. The QR code on the screen is not the menu. I wish I was sending food to you all, but I'm not. It's actually a link to a segmentation primer that we have on our website in case anyone's interested in downloading that. Please read it later. So just to dive right in, you know, do you have a segmentation that provides a strategic understanding of the types of people or the different need states that are served by your product category? You know, chances are if you do, you did that really foundational work more than a year ago in the time that we now call before COVID or pre-pandemic. Does the way you group people or usage occasions back then still even make sense today in a world where you attend conference talks in your pajamas without a free cocktail or a, you know, vendor branded tote bag? You know, LRW partnered with Google in this past year to conduct a really expansive study of COVID-related behavior change, and fully 83% of people, almost surprising, it's only 83% of people, reported that they've changed something about how they get food and beverages. And, you know, while the frequency of homemade meals and baking may recede a little bit as the economy recovers and people get vaccinated and we get out of our homes more, a lot of those new skills and hobbies are actually going to stick for a lot of people. So while not being able to eat at a closed restaurant did force trial of a lot of alternative things like app-based delivery, the pandemic really just accelerated and expanded trends that were already going on. Adoption was already occurring of these new behaviors. So while the frequency of these things might decline once there's herd immunity, or if you believe the New York Times, maybe there won't be herd immunity. In any event, I do believe that a lot of these changes are here to stay. So, you know, when you see me on this little bitty screen, instead of standing in the front of a classroom or at a podium at a conference, it probably makes you realize that things have changed a lot. And while it feels like that, and by the way, this is the only slide that does this weird ghost in the machine thing, so I'm going to just go backwards. It feels like it's been this way forever. It's really only been about a year, even if it feels like a lot longer than that. One of the things I want you to, I just have to live with it, it just goes. Except that what I want to say is written on the previous slide, so I apologize for that. Let me try to get back to it. And if not, we'll just jump ahead, because I'm sure whatever I said on the previous slide is not that crucial. Okay, sorry about that. Tried to get a hold of our design team to explain it to me, and I couldn't reach them. Couldn't just run into their offices because we're not in our offices yet. When you are doing a segmentation, there are 3 really crucial phases to the segmentation, and I'm going to use an analogy of home building. The first phase is architecting the work. You have to figure out exactly what your floor plan and features are going to be in order to meet your needs and wants. If you just entrust the work to a contractor and say, build me a house, without enough guidance, you're really not going to get what you want. So when engaging in a segmentation undertaking, it's really important to have a strong partnership with the research vendor that you're working with. In the next phase is when you actually construct the segmentation through doing the research. That's where you collect the relevant data, you do the statistical crafting of the winning solution, you bring the segments to life through in-depth qualitative research and compelling reporting. Without that step, you really haven't built the house. But without the next step, the house won't really be lived in and it won't be the cherished home that you were hoping for. So in the final phase that ensures the segmentation is leveraged fully and it doesn't just sit on a shelf somewhere, it's that one that drives the innovation in the strategy. Helps you maximize the effectiveness of your advertising, your marketing, your customer service, your retention tactics. So the first thing I want to do is talk about, if I can get anything to proceed. I think I lost it when there we go, that worked. The architect phase. So the residents in this analogy that I'm going to be talking to you about are the people whose needs need to be met by the segmentation. You need to understand really how they're going to live in it, how they're going to use it. If they're coming from another house or they're relocating because of the pandemic, like how much and what types of changes are they looking for? These residents that I'm talking about are not actually the consumers of the product or service you're selling. They're the internal stakeholders at your organization, the executives who have to set the strategy, the engineering team who needs to innovate the offerings, the advertising creatives who have to craft custom messages, the media buyers who need to target that messaging, the CRM team who needs to keep the current customers happy. All of these people may need to live in this house for the next 3 to 10 years. So you really need to gather their input early to assess their needs and identify what success is going to look like. To do this, we conduct interviews with all these stakeholders to ensure we know what their hypotheses are, their intended use cases, the pain points they have if you have an existing segmentation, all of that extra room that you're looking for to be a home gym, a home office, a home school room. The specs of those things would vary, so we really need to know which of those we're looking for. And then, ideally, there would be past research that your partner can review. And we want to do that to get as smart about your category as we possibly can. We don't want to just reinvent the wheel. And then we want to scan the market for blind spots, talk to consumers, explore, figure out what's driving category volume, what's driving brand choice, what the relevant use cases are, what the needs are that people are trying to fulfill, whether or not the language we're using is current and relevant and makes sense to people. And although there's a huge need these days and a growing need these days for speed, you skip this phase at your peril, because if you go driving off in the wrong direction, you're going to get there really, really fast, but you're not going to be where you want to be. So it's really important to proceed with these phases. Since the research review and qualitative exploration are fairly self-explanatory, and for those of you who don't already know a lot about these, I'm happy to talk in response to questions at the end of the talk. But for the purposes of what I'm planning to cover today, what I want to do is just skip straight to the stakeholder interviews. This is where you share institutional knowledge with the research partner. It's where you can make sure that everybody who has to act on the segmentation is able to tell us exactly what they're planning to do with it. You want to be crystal clear on what you can and you can't get out of this study, because the segmentation, although it's often thought of as doing all things for all people, it really can't. We need to really focus and understand the priorities. All things are a trade-off. So are the marketing goals more about messaging or targeting? Are the business goals more about customer acquisition or retention of existing customers? Will the segmentation be used mostly to build the brand or to develop new products? A great segmentation can inform all of those things at least a little bit, but if you try to serve all purposes, just like at a giant buffet meal, none of the food's going to be particularly good. We really want to focus on the parts that need to be most optimized to get at the priority objectives. And while most of us have learned in the last year that you can convert a spare bedroom into a home office or a gym, it's just not as good unless it's designed to be that in the first place. So if you want to use your new segmentation to guide personalized service or communications for your existing customers, or if you want to buy advertising against your target segments, then we need to design the research process with those use cases in mind. Those are the sorts of things that used to be difficult or impossible to do, but the modern technology space facilitates these activities as long as you set everything up properly to do it. And it requires talking to a different group of people in the organization, not just the insights team, but the people who know the ins and outs, the CRM tech stack, the media buying procedures, and so forth. And then once we know what the organization already knows or thinks it knows, we also have to figure out what it doesn't even know it doesn't know. These are what we call blind spots. You can use a process called online anthropology, which is a deep listening approach to web scraping that goes and scours the millions of online conversations that are just organically occurring between consumers when they're talking about categories. And it can identify use cases you didn't know existed or needs that you didn't know were going unfulfilled. And that allows you to realize that there are additional questions that you need to include in your segmentation study that might not have occurred to you just based on looking at your old research, talking amongst yourselves, or having a few focus groups. So those focus groups, they could uncover some of those things, but it's really a small scale undertaking. You're not talking to very many people when you're doing qualitative research. Whereas when you're doing online anthropology, you literally do have hundreds of thousands or even millions of comments that you can review and interrogate. So it helps you discover the edge cases and the missing bits. So let's move on to the construct phase, because this is really what most people think about when they think about segmentation and doing segmentation well. You construct your segmentation based on the outcomes of the architect phase. I'm going to go into detail about how you make your design choices, so I'll just cover some of these other points on this page much more quickly. The first one is quality. I'm absolutely passionate about quality. You have to take steps to make sure you have only really high quality respondents from a representative sample of the population. Around half of all segmentation surveys are now taken on smartphones, and a larger percentage of all surveys, but because segmentations tend to take 15 to 25 minutes of questions, it's only about half of segmentation respondents. So do everything in your power to keep that interview short enough and simple enough that people are going to feel like they can answer it on their phone. Because the people you lose, if it's not doable on a smartphone, are different from the people who would stick through it with you. So you want to keep it mobile first, easy to do, not too long. You want to also use question formats that are not subject to what we call scale usage variability. When you're asking people questions on rating scales, people have differences amongst themselves based on their personalities and their cultural characteristics that lead them to use those rating scales differently. And if you have a mix of rating scale behaviors in your data set, the statistical algorithms are going to tend to fall prey to that variability, because the signal contained within the scale usage differences is louder than the signal contained within the answers sometimes. So we like to use question formats that help to minimize or mitigate that difference from person to person and country to country. And then when it comes to the actual modeling itself, is equal parts arts and science. You want statistically sound groupings, of course, but what you're really trying to do is maximize the strategic relevance and actionability of the differences. There's not some number or statistic that's going to come out of an algorithm and tell you what the winning solution is. That's simply not true. If our goal here is to assign your customer relationship management, CRM, internal client database, if you're trying to take those people and assign them to segments, the findability of those segments, the predictive accuracy of that model is a statistic that's very important. But in terms of just generally assessing the relative quality of a bunch of different alternative segmentation solutions, it's really about the actionability and the interpretability and the ability to communicate the groups that matters so much more than just the statistics. Because that's the problem. A solution really is chosen. It just doesn't emerge magically out of the statistical back box. There's an infinite number of ways that I can statistically divide up a data set that are equally valid mathematically, but they're not all equally good from a business perspective in terms of the actions you can take. So you want the groups to differentiate from each other in logical and important ways, but you need to make sure that those distinctions are going to help you target differently or serve differently or develop new different products and services. Otherwise, it's just interesting. And I think a segmentation solution that's merely interesting is the kiss of death. It needs to be actionable. So what we do is we have the statisticians develop a wide variety of segmentation solutions. We cull through those, we narrow them down, we meet with our client service project teams to look at a subset of them, we narrow them further, and we usually take 2 of them to our clients to spend several hours debating and discussing the pros and cons of each before we decide on a winner. And then in the construction phase, the phase I really want to dive even deeper on is the designing part of it. This is the part where you're making a lot of really important decisions to make sure you're building the right kind of segmentation framework for the type of action you're planning to take. The population that you're segmenting can range from a very narrow view of just your current customers to a more typical focus on current category users, or to an even broader lens that might include all potential users. But I recommend you only include potentials in your category if the category is really in its infancy and rapidly growing and creating more trial, or if you're the category leader and you grow more by expanding the base than you do by stealing market share. Most brands are in a market share battle, and so I would really only talk to potential users if you have the ability to expand the category. Let's see. The category, on the other hand, is a whole nother decision you have to make. It might seem obvious what category you're in, but that's not always the case. It could be very narrowly defined, like sparkling wine. Hello, cat. It could be broadly defined, like all types of wine. It could be expansively defined, like all types of beer, wine, and spirits. You can tell that I've been trapped in pandemic drink from home mode for quite a while. When it comes to drawing your category boundaries, I usually recommend going broad enough to represent a lot of volume potential, but not so broad that respondents are likely to answer all of your questions with, it depends. Because if you find yourself wanting to say how I feel about that, what I want from that depends on the situation or the brand or the category, then you've probably defined your category too broadly. Because if you go broad, then you have to limit yourself to questions that kind of make sense in the context of all of the different aspects of the category. And that doesn't necessarily always apply. So in my previous example, ranging from sparkling wine to all sorts of alcohol, the question might be, should cannabis be included or not, right? Does that take it just a little step too far in order for people to be able to think about all of these items at the same time? So I've talked in previous talks that I've given about pros and cons of different types of segmentation inputs. The segmentation input is what you feed the algorithm to create the statistical divisions to define the groups. And there are some inputs that are really, really findable, like demographics, but actually usually not all that differentiating in terms of the attitudes and needs in the category. And then there are other things that tend to be super, super relevant to your category, like attitudes, needs, wants, beliefs, and values, but they're a lot harder to find. It's a lot harder to buy an ad against those people. We usually segment on those anyway, because that's where you get the most strategic relevance and learning and foundational insight into your category, even if it makes it a little bit harder to target. And the good news is that with today's modern marketing technology, until all the data gets banned or blocked in some way, fashion, shape, or form, it's become increasingly easy to target ads to people based on their likely attitudes, needs, and beliefs. So that's a really important decision. Another crucial design decision that you really need to decide is whether you're segmenting people or occasions. Most segmentations are done at the person level. And by that, I mean that a consumer belongs to one segment for a really extended period of time until something significant happens in their life or in the market that causes them to shift into a different segment. You can design your products or services with that type of person in mind. You can classify the customers in your database as belonging to a particular segment. You can target advertising messages to people who are likely to belong to that segment. You can customize all of those messages based on the segment you think you're delivering them to. All of this person level segmentation requires grouping people based on, in my general recommendation, attitudes, needs, or behaviors, things that generally apply to them or the category and that they would not answer with, it depends. Am I using it for this or that? Person level segmentations are almost always the right fit for categories like durables or subscriptions, where a person chooses one product or service to meet all their needs in the category. They're also useful for packaged goods, master brands that might be competing in a variety of different related categories, but where they want to have a single brand target. So that would be typically a person segmentation. On the other hand, some segmentations are done at the occasion level. And by that, I mean each person could be in a different segment depending on the situation, what usage occasion they're experiencing. To minimize the confusion between these two types of approaches, the industry tends to refer to person level segments as segments, And they tend to refer to occasion level segments as need states, demand spaces, jobs to be done, one of those many phrases. One thing you'll learn in this industry is there are a lot of different words for the exact same thing. A job to be done is usually defined by a combination of situational, social, emotional, and functional needs that the consumer is trying to fulfill when they're choosing a particular brand or product from the category for a specific occasion. If you want to understand why people are choosing wine with dinner and beer for football, you probably want an occasion-based segmentation framework. On the other hand, if you want to deprioritize those people who think that expensive wine is only for special occasions like date night or entertaining, and instead target people who crack open the good stuff on the sofa, then you probably need a person segmentation. Or you might need both. If you have an organization that is really sophisticated and they can handle the complexity of understanding both groups of people and types of occasions, then you can build something called a demand landscape, which tends to cross the groups of people against the types of occasions and gives you opportunities to discover maybe which individual product or brand from my portfolio should be targeted against specific settings within this broader complex landscape. It lets you focus your branding efforts on the types of people, but then focus your individual SKUs or your individual product lines against different need states. So if you have a house of brands, it helps you not step on each other's toes, because oftentimes all the brands want to go after the same segment because that segment seems attractive, but you might be able to have different brands going after different use cases. If it's a repertoire category where a person tends to have different decision criteria in different situations from occasion to occasion, it's probably best to define your person segments based on the beliefs, such as more expensive wine is always worth it, or I'm a person who buys American, or I really care about sustainability and organic and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those tend to be beliefs. They tend to transcend the situation or the setting. And then you would define your occasion-based segments on the selection criteria, how important things are to you about taste, price, prestige, things like that, because those are things where you might deprioritize one issue versus another depending on the situation. And then the personalized marketing efforts are going to focus on the person level segments unless you have the really challenging ability to target a specific use case or occasion. If the job to be done is very clearly tied to a particular geographic area or a particular time of day, you might be able to use that sort of mobile targeting, for example, to deliver the right message at the right time for that occasion. But generally, most of personalized marketing is still going to be targeted at the level of the person. Okay. So when you're doing a demand landscape, you're often going after usage occasions, and many people make their decisions in different usage occasions in a very habitual, knee-jerk way. They don't think about it at all, they just do it. And so you have a better chance of stealing share from competitors in use case situations where there is a weaker habit going on. So how would I know whether somebody is habitual or not? We tend to think about whether this is the sort of thing that happens regularly. If it happens regularly, there's the opportunity that you've developed a habit around it. Are there specific triggers that lead to the behavior? If so, there's a good chance that those triggers lead to ingrained behavioral responses. Are people satisfied with the same solution most of the time that they use it? If so, that may indicate that they're using a habitual response. And if that solution is mostly used for this sort of a situation, but not used for other sorts of situations, again, this may indicate a habit as opposed to just the kind of person who just uses the same thing for everything. Once we know how habitual the different occasions are, it gives us a better sense of whether or not this is an opportunity we have to disrupt the status quo. So habits have been coming up a lot in the last year as people have been saying, wow, is now the time to do foundational research? Can we really be talking to people about segmentation? The whole world's been turned on its ear. Do we understand what's going on? And, I would argue that at this point, we've been in this over a year. New habits have set in, things have been created. And while some triggers may recede in frequency or go away as people revert to previous behavior, a lot of these new things are now more widespread. And that's why we're bringing up the context of habits in the context of strategic foundational research, because of the unique time that we're living in right now. And then the last phase is inhabiting this home that you've built, this segmentation that you've created. Once you've developed your person-based or occasion-based segmentation framework, or both, you don't just give a presentation and issue a report. Successful use of a segmentation requires behavior change on the part of the internal team. They have to break their habits. So part of your job as an insights professional who's rolling out a segmentation is to help the stakeholders really move into that new home and get used to the new framework and what that means for the way they're going to be working. Because if they don't change how they're doing their day-to-day business, you're not going to get a very good return on your research investment. Segmentations that fail are occasionally poorly made, statistically ill-defined, or otherwise just not well executed. But more often than not, when a segmentation fails, it's because it got all the way to this stage and then it just petered out. Because somebody gave this awesome presentation and all these great visuals and everybody like clapped them on the back for what good work they did. And then it never went anywhere from there. Good segmentations fail because of weak integration and activation efforts. Vaccines don't save lives, vaccinations do. It's not enough to build the segmentation. You have to get it to the people who need to use it and then get them to take action on it. So first, you're going to rigorously prioritize your target segments based on a combination of economic opportunity, which is how much the segment is worth in the marketplace, and capturability, which is how easily you can win with them based on your brand, your vision, your mission, your channels of distribution, your price points, and all those sorts of things. Is this lucrative segment one that you have a good chance of winning with? And once you've factored in both of those considerations, you can decide who it is you're going to prioritize. It's the very rare company that can go after all segments. One of the main goals of segmentation is to help you figure out who you can deprioritize and not focus your efforts on. And then once you've decided who your priority segments are, you want to do a really stellar job of communicating those results to your stakeholders so they really understand who the segments are, they embrace who those segments are as people. You know, having spent my entire life doing statistical analysis of data, I'd love to think that indices and percentage point gaps and bar charts are enough to get people to embrace segments, but it's really not. Human being brains are wired to understand social animals and to get to know individuals and people. And so that's why we often develop something called a persona. It basically takes a stereotyped member of a segment and describes them in rich, glorious detail and lets you get to know them as a person. And once you know them as a person, it's a lot easier to design products for them, messaging for them, and so often. So the strategy and innovation benefits of a really well-accepted segmentation are huge in and of themselves. But once you also get your marketing technology and your big data assets in play to help activate against them, you're going to get the really big ROI. You really do need to plan for that in advance, but it is now possible in the most recent few years to start targeting advertising to segments. So you don't want to take all that internal integration for granted. Think of that segmentation rollout like a new brand campaign kicked off with a Super Bowl ad. There was all these high production values, lots of hoopla that go into it, but if you never run the ad again, there's a really good chance that people are going to forget who you are, not get to understand you, not adopt you into their lives. So what we often do after we do the statistical formation of segments is we do a qualitative step where we get a richer understanding of the why and the how. Oftentimes we'll capture video and audio clips so that we can make multimedia materials. We might append some data from the big data vendors that exist out there to capture even more profiling information. Because as I said, you got to keep your surveys short. So you don't want to just cram in 5 more minutes worth of profiling questions if that's the kind of data that you can buy externally out there on the marketplace. We built something we call a typing tool. It's for a short form or the golden questions. Again, there's a bunch of different phrases different companies use to refer to these. But it's the handful of questions necessary to figure out what segment somebody belongs to in some future research. You might want to recruit members of your target segments to test your concepts for you, to invite you into their home to show you their collection of products or services that are relevant to whatever it is you're trying to understand. If you go in and check out some more of my content on our website, we have a blog in there about a coronavirus coping cohort that has a short form typing tool that you can take to get the experience of taking a typing tool, being put into a segment, and then reading about yourself. What this does is it really helps you keep your segmentation alive in all future research efforts. You can include it in your brand tracking and any other research that you're doing. So let's say we've identified an opportunity to refine your positioning, refresh your logo, change your voice, your visual expression, any of these elements of the marketing mix. Built on top of the solid brand articulation, the digital activation of the segmentation is going to power the marketing tactics at every stage of the consumer lifecycle. We're going to get your prospects to notice and engage with you. We're going to use targeted and personalized messaging that talks to the unique attitudes, needs, and motivations of every segment. We're going to convert prospects into customers, facilitated through cross-channel, cross-device digital experiences that are going to highlight the services that are most appealing to each segment. We're going to sustain and deepen the customer engagement using your CRM email communications or your in-app experiences to encourage retention, to maximize lifetime value. You can even have your customer service reps, if you still have those, deal with people differently depending on what segment their database says they belong to. Basically, our goal ultimately being to get your customers to be as loyal as possible, to advocate for you so that you're going to be, earning new customers and not just paying for new customers. All of these things can be affected through segmentation. So at each of those stages, the activation advantage from the segmentation is not just from creating segment-specific messages, but from actually delivering those messages in a targeted way to the people who are likely to resonate with those segment messages. The technology is really helping us do that. It's helping us get the right message to the right person, sometimes even at the right time. To go a little bit further though, that personalized messaging can also, as I said, get there at the right time, the right place. This depends in part on, again, the information ecosystem that's available. This is changing rapidly out there as the big tech companies are debating over, access to data, governments getting involved, Europe is very strict, all these sorts of things. But depending on what information you have access to, you might be able to deliver an occasion-based message to that person at the right time so that they can literally act on it right then. The thing about the CRM scoring, though, telling your database, this is what segment I believe this person belongs to, is there tends to be a massive disconnect between the information you have in your database, which tends to be things like, what did they buy? When did they buy it? How much did they spend? How often do they order? How large is their transaction base? How long have they been a customer? There's a massive disconnect between all of that and their attitudes, needs, and beliefs in the category. If you use my airline behavior, United Airlines thinks I'm a skier, Southwest Airlines thinks I'm a gambler, and American Airlines thinks that I'm a road warrior, or at least they did until a year ago. And I am the same person, but the information they each have on me is a function of the types of flights that I take on their airlines and the occasions for which they are best suited. And so those models are not super, super accurate. So the thing about when you're scoring your customer database, it's super important to realize is that if I've got a 5-segment solution, average segment is 20% in size. If I wanted to send a message to that segment, I have a 20% chance of delivering the message to the right person. By building a predictive model in my database, if I can boost that accuracy from 20% to 40%, that's a huge success because I've doubled my hit rate. I'm still wrong more often than I'm right. So when you use things like database scoring algorithms to bring a segmentation into your internal ecosystem, unless you actually segment it on the behaviors that are in that database, you're going to have a really big disconnect in terms of accuracy. And it's just important to be prepared for that. It's about lift, not accuracy. I mentioned that it is challenging in the ever-shifting privacy database landscape to go after specific occasions. Now, there is one situation where you have a better chance of going after occasions, and that's actually site visitation, when people are coming into your website or your app to engage in an activity. You can actually collect a lot of clickstream data from people who are coming to visit your site, and you can give them a site intercept survey to ask them questions about what they're trying to accomplish, and you can do a CRM survey to find out what the attitudes and needs of your customers are. And through that 360-degree view, you can build a segmentation of site visitors that really are classifying the different types of jobs they're trying to do. And once you know what types of jobs people are trying to do on your website, you can actually redesign your website to be a better experience for each of those types of people, and then predict as they enter the site which of those jobs they're actually pursuing, and make the experience a better one. This is like really cutting edge stuff and particularly new, but it doesn't have to be survey-based data that feeds into your segmentation. And it doesn't have to be customer database data. It can be the more real-time clickstream type data feeding in to a segmentation as well. And then before you have them into your customer, they belong out in the big bad world and they're not yet a customer, but you want to send messages to them. And those messages are acquisition oriented messages. The goal there is to get them to think of you and consider you and switch to you ideally. So with the addressable media that are available out there at increasing levels all the time, we can rely on signals about the individuals who belong to different segments to build predictive models, lookalike models, what we call audiences in the digital marketing space that allow us to target ads to different types of people. How you do this is highly contingent on the individual organization, their marketing platforms, the investments they've made in data and so forth. So different people will have to do this differently. But the main point I just want to make is that it is now possible to target segments using external data. And I know I said that 2 or 3 times, but that's the newest thing for the people who've been working in insights for a long time, is the idea that it doesn't have to end with the insight. It can actually move on to the action. So when you go through this really rigorous process of architecting your segmentation, carefully constructing it, and then applying a little extra effort to actually move in and really enjoy the benefits of the home. So what I want to do at this point is open it up to questions. I think I will get questions today, even though it's a little awkward in the Zoom setting, because, you know, I think that a lot of you are in learning mode and you're used to asking questions. So please jump in with some questions. If you don't think of them now and you think of them later and you'd want to, you know, forward some information along, and you can contact me at either through Twitter, or you could send it to me. It's my first initial last name at lowonline.com. All right, I'm going to just go quiet for a second and make myself available. I don't know the best process, if we should just have people unmute themselves and speak. I don't know if there's a hand raise option in Zoom. I will let China moderate.
So what we could do is I got some questions from different individuals. So I put them in the chat because I got a couple of different people messaging me some questions. I think they're pretty interesting. Quite a few. So
let me see if I can figure out how to stop showing my screen. Or can you just read me a question and just
yeah,
send it my way and I will answer, because I don't want to mess with the technology and accidentally get cut off.
Sure, absolutely. Are there some questions that we can validate the answers you get from potential customers?
As in to see whether or not they're being honest with us?
I'm assuming yes, yeah.
Yeah. So there's 2 different issues. One is the behavioral validation. Do they really do what they say they do? And then there's, do they believe what they say they believe? And oftentimes, whether or not somebody really is eco-friendly or not is not as important as the fact that they thought it was important to tell you that they're eco-friendly, because that means they will signal on eco-friendly. They may want to badge themselves with eco-friendly products. They may go home and you know, throw away all of their recyclables, but it still tells you something about what they think is important to say to the world or what might matter. So sometimes it's less crucial that they actually be eco-friendly than that they express that eco-friendly is a priority for them. So that's one thing. But I would say that you can trick people into being really honest with you about just how eco-friendly they are by getting certain behaviors, particularly before you ask the more socially desirable questions. They give you an opportunity to see that, hey, what they're doing doesn't seem to line up with what they're saying. And then on the behavioral side, self-reported behavior data is tragically bad. In particular, self-reported spend data is tragically bad. People may or may not have paid attention to what they paid at the time that they paid it. That may have been 1 week or 6 months ago. They've had many transactions in between. We're all notoriously bad at math. So when you're asking people things like spend, that is more accurate on a relative basis. You have a general sense of whether this person is high, medium, or low relative to other people on their spend. But if you really need to get a good financial assessment, that's a situation where having customer database records appended can be very helpful, because then you actually have the transactional data from your database. Or you may be able to partner with one of the companies that provides diary data, although that tends to be very expensive.
Hmm. Oh, interesting. That leads to another question. Is there some examples of some statistical techniques that you use for validation of answers from customers?
Again, we're usually looking more at, do we believe that the respondent to our survey is a legitimate respondent rather than a survey bot or a click farm or something like that, whether their answers are internally consistent, whether they're avoiding straight lining, whether they're correctly answering trap questions that ensure they're reading the questions. We don't as so much check to make sure of the validation of their answers per se. If I'm talking to an IT professional or somebody like that, I may have knowledge test questions to ensure they are who they say they are. But I wouldn't say that I focus very much on trying to like check their math, so to speak, to make sure that they're really telling us the truth beyond that.
Okay, thank you. The next question that we have is how do we increase response rates? Some customers may not be motivated to answer without, reward for participation.
Yeah. So response rates are really challenging. If you are dealing with your own sample, your customer database sample, response rates are exceptionally low, and you generally boost them by like inviting them with yourself with your, the marquee name of "it's us." That will introduce a certain amount of bias, because it will be the people who love you or hate you who will respond to you by name rather than responding to an independent third-party research vendor. So you boost the response rate at the expense of building in some bias. And so if part of your segmentation requires understanding affinity for the brands, it may be important to do your study on what we call a blinded basis instead of a branded basis, in which case you may have to live with a lower response rate in order to avoid getting the bias in there. I would say that all research has incentives of one type or another. I think the best respondents are the ones who actually want to have their opinion heard and want to influence businesses, rather than the ones who want to earn the incentives. But realistically speaking, we're all very busy, and we have an awful lot of platforms we can now use to have our voices heard through social media and other ways. So you do have to really rely on those incentives. I think a variety of incentives are helpful. For example, when we collect data, we partner with a variety of different sample providers, and each of those sample providers has different methods of both recruiting and incentivizing their respondents. That allows you to have people who might be more motivated by points versus motivated by money versus motivated by, restaurant gift certificates versus motivated by charitable contributions. I don't have the latest research and white paper information on, are you better off with a raffle versus a pure incentive in different populations, and the legal requirements are varying from state to state and country to country. So there's certain things you can and can't do. So I defer those sorts of very granular questions to people like China in our global data collection department, who eat, sleep, and breathe trying to make sure that we can get enough people to participate in our research so that we can feel good about the result.
Excellent, thank you. And then we have another one that says, does market segmentation need a review the holy grail of 4 Ps of marketing? So I think that's, getting at.
I think that certainly price is a key dimension in every segmentation study, because not only is it a driver of brand choice, it's a driver of category volume and a willingness to become a loyal customer. It's also a driver of economic opportunity as a customer you can obtain. So certainly the pricing piece of things is very important all the time. I think that segmentation is what allows you to do positioning. The very idea that you would position your brand to stand for something is inherent to the idea of market segmentation. If you were going to be all things to all people, then you wouldn't need positioning. So the idea that there is a positioning basically means you need segmentation. And ideally, you would identify segments of people that resonate more and less with your positioning so that you can focus on those who resonate with what you're doing and avoid those who resonate more with your competitors. So I think the basic fundamentals of marketing are crucial to segmentation, and I really think that you can't believe in marketing unless you also believe in segmentation.
I tend to agree with that sentiment. Then there's another question. It's a little bit more specific to like the pandemic, and it was asking, will less customers go shopping at malls, resulting in mall closures and opportunities for buying real estate at distressed prices?
Yes, I imagine so. This is part of that transition accelerating that I described in the context of food. Same thing in terms of shopping. The spikes in digital shopping over the last year were dramatic, to say the least. And while there are some people who miss the process of shopping in stores, and there will always be people who want to feel the product and touch the product and not have to send it back if they don't like it when they get it, there is also a lot of new habits that have been created with respect to ordering online. There's a lot of new infrastructure that's been built by companies to facilitate buy online, pick up in store, takeout, and all those other options. And so I absolutely believe that more malls will go out of business than were already going out of business before the pandemic or did during the pandemic. There's just a lot of shifts with everybody also having moved out of the more urban areas to the more suburban areas. The whole real estate market is definitely remaking itself. I was just reading today about how office space is shifting into more suburban areas for those reasons. So some of these things are not going to bounce back. There are certain things that will not revert, at least not for a very long time. Everything in life is cyclical, tends to be a pendulum swing one way or another. But I do think that some of these things are not just going to bounce back like a rubber band.
Excellent. And then we have another one from Jamin Jung, and it says, it's very interesting to hear about the topics related to the following through the research, such as segmentation, activation, and internal marketing. It makes perfect sense for brands, but how often does market research companies like LRW get involved in such a stage? And then how long does it take compared to just getting insights or recommendations?
So bringing the insights into the media buying and targeting phase does require usually a little extra data collection, but you can pretty rapidly deploy the learning from that additional information into the buying process. Our company, LRW, is one of several companies that are part of an entity called Material, which is an integrated marketing services company. And so our intention is to build activation phases into segmentation initiatives much more often than has happened in the past. It used to be an insights company would get hired to get the insights, and then you would go to an agency, and the agency would try to figure out what to do with the insights. And we're trying to create a more seamless process where you can build both steps into the same undertaking. But it does take longer than the insights alone. I would agree with that.
Excellent. Thank you. Do we have any additional questions from people?
Perhaps from one of the professors that are on the call? They must have a good question.
Yeah, a lot of them I shot from professors. So yeah. Dr. Stein, did you say something? I think I heard you.
Well, I thought maybe with that I would try to throw one in there. Thanks for joining us. Hi. Hey, good to see you.
Yeah, Randy was on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I had in mind, maybe I'll ask, have you noticed any, has the pandemic changed how respondents answer questions? Has it changed data collection? Is it harder? Is it easier compared to a year ago?
So for a while, at the beginning of the pandemic in particular, it was a lot easier to get respondents because people had a lot of time on their hands. A lot of them started taking their surveys on computers instead of smartphones because they were sitting around the house and it was just easier to do that than taking them somewhere else. And then as the election cycle came in and political polling sucked up a lot of the air out of the room, it became harder to get people to take consumer surveys because they were all busy taking political polls. And then they were a little disgusted and tired of all that. And then as we got past the fall phase and now we're starting to open up a little bit, people are like excited about not being at home doing things. So it is definitely having some impact on the ability to get people to take surveys. That and the fact that sample is so inexpensive that we've all started doing really, really large scale studies that perhaps don't need really, really large scale samples. So there have definitely been some effects, and it's not just a linear effect. It's, you know, things are going up and down and shifting at different points in time, which is a bit challenging for the tracking studies because they're having to explain, well, why do we think this is happening? You know, because actually the people participating in the category had fundamentally changed from one period to the next. So yeah, it's been let's call it interesting times, challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of had a question that I'm not sure. With the last year, I think the biggest thing is I think people's priorities have certainly shifted. I know that like for a lot of people, it's like their health is like that's something they're more conscious of, and those kind of aspects. Are those things that brands should be conscious of asking when trying to do segmentation more now that it was kind of on people's forefront last year? I think more people would probably be stronger in their concern over health maybe than they had been, you know, 2 or 3 years previous. Even if a company isn't health-based, do you think that should be something they should consider?
Either it's directly relevant to the product choice or the category choice, or it helps you understand who this person is as a person. I find that we always have a section of questions that are kind of more psychographics and values based, even when we have a client who wants a very concrete category centric solution, because it just helps them wrap their heads around, this person's conservative, that explains so much, you know, that sort of a thing. And so I think it would be very valuable to have that in there if you weren't already, but many categories would already have been tapping that. It's just that now more people would be expressing that consideration than expressing.
Right. Absolutely.
And the other thing that's important to realize, you know, all markets are segmented. We were talking a lot this year about obviously streaming services and how people are getting their video. And you know, so a lot of people reacted with, oh, people want to see uplifting, inspiring content because it will make them feel so much better about the world. And then they would go, wait a minute, I don't understand. Why are they watching all these, you know, downer movies about horrible things that have happened in history? And I'm like, well, because there are two kinds of people. The people who feel better by watching the uplifting stuff, and the people who feel better by going, well, at least I don't have bombs raining down on my head in London in World War II. You know, so you could solve the same need using two different types of products depending on what kind of person you are. So, you know, all markets are segmented, and just because one reaction makes sense doesn't mean that the opposite reaction does not also make sense, just for a different person. And the key is understanding what those different people are so that you can address both of them, or choose which one to address because they're more lucrative and capturable.